the political game that's being played here. You don't bring in legislation at the very end of June with a view that this is something that you're going to get done. It's a view that you want to get some publicity and you want to get a headline.
Well, the federal government is taking dramatic steps to keep criminals and perceived security threats out of the country. They want to give non-citizens convicted of crimes a swift boot. Today, Citizenship and Immigration Minister Jason Kenney unveiled new measures aimed at speeding up the deportation process and boosting public safety. Let's take a look at some of the highlights in our hot sheet. It's called the Faster Removal of Foreign Criminals Act. It eliminates appeals for non-citizens who are sentenced to more than 6 months in jail. So, for example, a permanent resident sentenced to 11 months for sexual assault would be ineligible to appeal a removal order. It gives new ministerial authority to refuse temporary resident status for up to 3 years in exceptional cases, and it imposes a 5-year inadmissibility period for misrepresentation. So, this new legislation follows through on a campaign commitment to clamp down on convicted criminals fighting deportation. But how will these new measures actually work to enhance public safety? We'll get reaction from opposition MPs in just a few minutes, but first, we're joined by the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, Jason Kenney. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here, Chris. Thanks very much.
I just want to bring up, in your platform, you talked about removing dangerous foreign criminals. You've removed the dangerous from the legislation. Why?
Well, I get dangerous or serious. The current Immigration Act defines a serious criminality as those who have received a sentence of 6 months or more, who are not Canadian citizens, and so that's the benchmark that we're using. I think you can call them dangerous, you can call them serious. We don't want them in Canada anymore. That's the bottom line.
Okay. So you went through in your news conference some of the things about people who have been abusing the system: child abusers, drug traffickers, fraudsters, murderers, thieves. I think most people would expect that they would receive much longer than a 6-month sentence.
So under the current, yes, in many cases they do. I've raised some cases today of people who, typically what we're seeing are situations where people are convicted of offenses like drug trafficking, aggravated assault, assault with a firearm, maybe even sexual assault. A few years later, they get out of prison. Well, if they're sentenced to 2 years less a day under the current system, which has often happened, they get access to a special appeal at the IRB. They can then appeal that to the federal court. They can then appeal that to the Federal Court of Appeals. And altogether, you're talking about adding 2 to 3 years before the inevitable deportation. We're simply saying, if you're a foreign citizen, you've committed what our law says is a serious crime, you've been found guilty by a court, you get your day in court on your removal, on the revocation of your permanent residency, and you can appeal that to the federal court, but that's it. You don't just get to delay this thing forever.
Okay. But what happens to those people who are convicted and sentenced to 6 months in lieu of a fine, for example, which they can't afford to pay? Things that aren't typically considered to be the serious or dangerous crimes.
I think it's actually pretty simple. If you're a foreign national and you want to maintain the privilege of staying in Canada, don't commit a serious crime. Don't commit a crime that would end up with a 6-month sentence in a Canadian court. I don't think that's too much to ask people.
Okay. You went through a number of examples you gave of people who had really stretched out the process. And I'm wondering, as you look at these changes, you are saying that you'll be able to deal with these people more quickly. And I'm wondering, out of all of these cases that you've seen where people have appealed, how typical is it for a deportation order coming in 1 year and then 6 years later after all the appeals are exhausted?
We have hundreds of cases like that. Today I mentioned, I think, 4 during my press conference, but I've got a long list, literally dozens and dozens of cases just in the past few years that I became aware of it through media stories. One classic case would be Jackie Tran in Calgary, was running a drug gang, multiple convictions, but the police never were able to nail him on a major crime like a murder. So he kept stretching out multiple appeals on his deportation. It took us, I think, 7 years to finally deport him after his original serious criminal conviction. And what really irks me, and I think most Canadians, is that too many of these guys end up re-offending. The worst case of all was that of a fellow in Toronto, was sentenced to 2 years less a day, managed to abuse the loopholes in the system, avoiding deportation, and during that time, he killed a Toronto police constable named Todd Bayless. And really, when I think about this bill, it's to stop things like that from happening.
Okay, now, Bob Rae, the Liberal leader, came out and talked about the changes that you're putting forward. I think we have a clip. Do we have a clip? Okay, we've already played the clip that we heard, where he talked about the government, when it's in trouble, tries to change the channel by reverting back to a law and order agenda. What do you say to that?
Well, I think he's absolutely wrong. We plan to introduce this bill sometime this spring, and we wanted to get it done before we broke for summer so we can have this on the order paper, move forward with it in the fall. I hope the opposition parties will study it over the summer and agree that this will have massive public support, and they should cooperate with its expeditious passage.
Yeah. I was interested in your comments also at this news conference you referred to, where you candidly admitted that you could not have gotten this through in a minority government. That makes me ask, you're now using the majority to put it through, you're appealing to the opposition to try and support it. So what should Canadians take away from that? That there is such a division in politics now that we can't discuss the appropriateness of the actions that you're taking?
That may be one thing. I think there has been, and I was in opposition. There's sometimes a tendency in opposition to reflexively oppose everything the government does. I think that's unfortunate. I hope they'll look at this bill on its merits. But the reality is, most of the opposition parties, both of them, have tended to oppose all of our criminal justice measures. I think this one will have massive public support. I don't think Canadians believe that foreign criminals who have been convicted have any right to stay in Canada indefinitely, that we should be able to kick them out of the country in a reasonable amount of time. That's what the bill says. This
is one of a number of bills that you have introduced, and I think you were also asked this earlier in the news conference about the discretion or the power you're giving to the minister, to intervene in some of these cases. Why is that such a necessary measure as part of it?
Well, this is a provision in the bill that would allow us to close a loophole, which we've been asked to do by opposition parties and by the Quebec National Assembly, by media commentators. Sometimes we have foreigners who do not have a criminal conviction and are therefore not strictly inadmissible to Canada under our current law, but who, for example, may have a long track record of promoting violence or hatred against vulnerable groups. I can think of a case of a imam last year who was coming to speak to a conference, long track record of calling for homosexuals to be executed, women to be justifying spousal abuse, anti-Semitism. We have no legal tool to keep him out right now because he hasn't committed a crime in, say, Saudi Arabia. He might be committing hate crimes in Canada. Under this new discretionary authority, which the United Kingdom, the U.S., Australia, and New Zealand all have, the minister would be able to say, this person may represent a risk to Canada, and therefore we will use discretionary authority to prevent his admission into the country. We would use it sparingly, probably only a handful of cases a year, really for those folks for which there is no other legal grounds to keep them out of the country.
Now, I have you here. You've had a busy agenda. I want to talk about the court case about the federal skilled workers backlog, getting rid of that list. What's the response? I mean, there is an opportunity here for a class action suit to go forward. What will you do?
That particular court decision was actually quite limited in its application. It just basically considered some applications in old backlog. And we're actually processing that backlog anyway. So it doesn't affect in fact, the decision of the federal court last week recognized that if there is clear legislative language allowing us to return old applications, that is the authority we need. That authority is included in Bill C-38 and will become the law next week. This will allow us to move to a just-in-time immigration system, which is critical if we want better economic results for immigrants.
But of those people who are involved in this suit, what do you do with them specifically? I think it's 900, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 800. And our lawyers and our operational people in my department are looking at that question. Because it's sub judice, I probably shouldn't go into details.
But the law does go in place as of next week, and you'll proceed.
Right.
Okay. Now, I have to ask you this before we go. A little bit of a rhubarb this week about an email that you had sent with some unflattering comments about an Alberta politician. What does it say about the state of federal Alberta relations? There's no secret in this town that many of your colleagues were interested in seeing Daniel Smith and the Wild Rose win that last election. So how does this set it back, or how do you?
I don't comment on personal or private
I understand,
communications,
but I want to go beyond.
In terms of it says nothing about Alberta federal relations. I honestly believe that Alberta federal relations have never been better. There's more alignment between the federal government and the Alberta government than we've ever seen on policy issues.
But she's opening an office here. She's got Lee Richardson, your former colleague, to be your chief of staff. My sense is that she thinks there may be a problem here.
Well, look, I think that there were some tensions, some communications issues between the former provincial government in Alberta, perhaps on some issues, and our federal government. And I have to give credit to Premier Redford. She's taken a much more constructive approach to engaging with us. Look, whether it's on the gun registry, the wheat board, defending the growth of Alberta's energy industry, per capita health transfers to Alberta so it finally gets its fair share of federal health transfers. On these and other issues, we are responding to the longstanding demands of the Alberta government. And look, I mean, politically, in my own Conservative Riding Association board, I have as members the Minister of Transport and the Attorney General. I mean, we have a lot of close political linkages as well.
You do. Okay. Jason Kenney, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. That was Immigration Minister Jason Kenney. In a few minutes, we'll get opposition reaction to the government's move to deport criminals, but first, we want to hear from you. Here's our ballot box question. Should non-citizens be deported if they commit a crime? Let us know what you think. Go to the ballot box section of our Facebook page or cbc.ca/politics, or you can scan the QR code at the bottom of your screen and you go instantly to our ballot box. And of course, you have comments on anything you hear on this show, you can be part of our conversation.